Welcome to Sleepless historian Salavora. Tonight's story was discovered inside a forgotten leather journal hidden beneath the cracked floorboards of an abandoned church near the Scottish Highlands. Historians dismissed the pages as fiction because the dates inside made no sense. Yet every person who claimed to understand the journal disappeared before finishing its final chapter. Perhaps they simply walked away. Or perhaps they finally heard the bell that always rings one day too early. So dim the lights, settle into your favorite chair, and let history guide you somewhere that maps were never meant to reveal. The year was 1847. Rain had fallen across northern Scotland for 11 straight days. Villagers believed the endless storm carried whispers from people who had died without saying goodbye. Most laughed at the old superstition. Except for Elias Rowan. At 28 years old, Elias worked as a traveling document collector for wealthy universities in London. His profession was unusual. He searched forgotten monasteries, abandoned castles, ruined libraries, and family estates for manuscripts that history had misplaced. He wasn't searching for treasure. He searched for forgotten voices. People often asked why anyone would dedicate their life to dusty papers. Elias always answered the same way. Gold tells us how people became rich. But old words tell us who they really were. On a grey October afternoon, a sealed package arrived at his rented room in Inverness. There was no return address. Only his full name written in elegant handwriting. Inside rested a single brass key. A folded map. And one sentence. The village erased itself before anyone else could. No signature. No explanation. Only those 7 words. Most sensible people would have burned the letter. Elias packed his coat instead. The map pointed toward a valley that no modern survey mentioned. Curiously, the valley appeared on maps printed before 1790. Then vanished from every map afterward. As if the land itself had politely asked cartographers to forget it existed. 3 days later, Elias hired an elderly horseman named Malcolm. Malcolm studied the map for nearly 5 minutes before speaking. "I know these mountains. I've crossed every road here. But this valley, it shouldn't exist." Elias assumed the old man simply hadn't visited every trail. Malcolm quietly folded the map again. "No. You misunderstand. I've been there. And then I somehow forgot how to return." Silence filled the stable. Rain tapped softly against wooden beams. Elias smiled politely. Memory plays tricks on everyone. Especially old travelers. Malcolm looked directly into his eyes. "You'll think I'm lying. I wish I were." The journey lasted 4 days. Roads slowly disappeared into muddy paths. Villages became scattered cottages. Then forests swallowed nearly every sign of civilization. By the 5th morning, even birds seemed strangely absent. No singing. No wings. Nothing. Only wind. Near sunset, Malcolm stopped the wagon. "I won't go farther. We're here." Elias climbed down. Nothing stood before them except dense pine trees. There isn't even a road. There wasn't one last time either. Malcolm refused to explain further. Instead, he handed Elias a small silver pocket watch. "My father gave me this. If the watch ever begins moving backward, run." Before Elias could ask another question, Malcolm turned his horses around. Within minutes, he disappeared into the forest. Leaving Elias completely alone. The silence felt unnatural. Not peaceful. Empty. As though every sound had been carefully removed. He followed the map on foot. Branches scratched against his coat. Mist drifted between ancient trees. After nearly 2 hours, he noticed something impossible. Fresh footprints. Bare feet. A child. The footprints never became deeper. Never lighter. Every step looked identical. As though whoever walked there weighed exactly the same every moment of their life. The trail ended beside a stone bridge. Except, there was no river beneath it. Only dry earth. The bridge connected nothing. Yet someone had carefully maintained it. Fresh moss had been removed from the stones. Flowers rested along its edge. Someone still visited this forgotten place. Crossing the bridge felt strangely cold. Not the cold of weather. The cold of entering somewhere that had been waiting. The forest suddenly opened. Before him stretched a beautiful valley untouched by modern life. Small stone cottages. White smoke rising from chimneys. Children running through narrow streets. Farmers harvesting wheat. Church bells echoing across green hills. Everything appeared peaceful. Almost too peaceful. A wooden sign welcomed travelers. Welcome to Ashmere. Population. Elias smiled. An entire village. Missing from history. He hurried toward the nearest cottage. Before reaching it, every person stopped moving. Exactly at the same instant. Children froze. Workers lowered their tools. Dogs stopped barking. Nobody spoke. 318 people slowly turned their heads toward Elias. Perfectly together. Every eye met his. No fear. No surprise. Only recognition. As if they had been expecting him for generations. An elderly woman stepped forward. Her gray dress fluttered gently in the evening breeze. You took longer than last time. Elias frowned. I'm afraid we've never met. The woman smiled kindly. You always say that. Then the church bell rang. Once. Only once. Every villager quietly bowed their heads. The old woman whispered something Elias barely heard. It has begun again. He looked toward the church standing at the center of Ashmere. Its bell rope was swinging. But there was no one pulling it. Welcome back to Sleepless historian Salavora. Some places disappear because of war. Some disappear because nature takes them back. But there are places that vanish because they learn a dangerous secret. Tonight, the forgotten village of Ashmere has finally opened its gates. The only question is, will Elias leave with the truth? Or will history forget him, too? The church bell continued to sway. Slowly. Back and forth. The rope twisted as though invisible hands still clung to it. Yet the evening air was perfectly still. Not a single leaf moved. Elias stared at the tower. Every instinct told him to investigate immediately. But something else demanded his attention. The villagers. None of them had moved since the bell rang. Children remained frozen in the middle of games. A baker held a loaf of bread halfway from the oven. Two women stood facing each other with unfinished smiles. Even a dog sat perfectly still beside a wooden cart. The entire village had become a living painting. Only the elderly woman remained free to move. She watched Elias with patient eyes. As always, she whispered. You arrive before understanding. Elias shook his head. I've never been here. The woman tilted her head. Not yet. Those two words settled into the silence like falling snow. Not yet. It was an impossible answer. Yet something inside him resisted arguing. He reached into his satchel and removed a small notebook. Writing helped him think. He carefully recorded everything. October 17, 1847. Village, Ashmere. Population listed, 318. Unusual synchronized behavior observed after church bell. Possible mass ritual or psychological conditioning. The old woman smiled as he wrote. You always write that. Elias stopped. What did you say? You always believe there is a reasonable explanation. She laughed softly. I hope this time you find one. This time. Again. Those strange words. As though she remembered another version of him. At last the villagers began moving again. Not gradually. Instantly. Like puppets whose strings had been pulled at exactly the same moment. Children laughed. The baker continued placing bread onto shelves. Conversations resumed in mid-sentence. Nobody reacted as though anything unusual had happened. It was as if the frozen moment had never existed. Elias approached a young farmer carrying fresh apples. Excuse me. What happened when the bell rang? The farmer blinked. What bell? The church bell. I didn't hear one. But everyone stopped moving. The farmer frowned politely. I think you've had a long journey, sir. He walked away. Elias looked around. Everyone behaved normally. No confusion. No curiosity. Only him. Night arrived quickly inside the valley. Ashmere glowed beneath hundreds of oil lamps. Warm yellow light spilled from every window. The streets smelled of fresh bread, pine smoke, roasted vegetables, and damp earth. It should have felt comforting. Instead, everything seemed rehearsed. Too perfect. No arguments. No crying babies. No barking dogs. No broken fences. No drunk voices from the tavern. No signs of ordinary human disorder. Life flowed with impossible harmony. Almost like everyone had memorized tomorrow. The village inn stood beside the church. A carved wooden sign read, "The Last Evening." An odd name. Inside, only 12 guests occupied the dining hall. All 12 looked up simultaneously as Elias entered. Not 1 second apart. Exactly together. Then they smiled. The innkeeper welcomed him warmly. "We've prepared your room. I never reserved one." "You always do." Elias sighed. "I'm beginning to dislike that sentence." The innkeeper laughed. "So did you before." His room overlooked the churchyard. Simple furniture. A fireplace. A writing desk. A narrow bed. On the desk rested a candle. Beside it, another notebook. Elias frowned. It looked identical to his own. Same leather cover. Same brass clasp. He slowly opened it. His heart nearly stopped. The handwriting inside was his. Every letter. Every stroke. Every correction. It was unmistakably his own writing. The first page read, "If you are reading this, you have forgotten again." His hands trembled. He flipped through the pages. Dates filled the journal. 1847. 1848. 1849. Dozens of entries. All written across what appeared to be several months. Yet he had arrived only hours ago. One passage caught his attention. Day 11. They remember every version of me. Only I forget. The bell is not warning them. It is warning me. I still do not understand why. Another page. Day 26. Do not trust the mirrors after midnight. They never show the present. Another. Day 41. I finally entered the crypt beneath the church. I wish I hadn't. If I fail again, burn everything. Do not let anyone ring the bell. The remaining pages had been torn out. Only ragged edges remained. Someone had deliberately removed the ending. A cold breeze drifted across the room. The candle flickered. The window had opened by itself. Outside, the church bell moved once more. Without making a sound. swinging back and forth. Elias stepped closer. Then he noticed someone standing in the graveyard. A man. Wearing the exact same coat. The same boots. The same satchel. The same notebook tucked beneath one arm. The man slowly turned. Moonlight illuminated his face. Elias felt every breath leave his body. He was staring. At himself. Not someone similar. Not a relative. Himself. The other Elias looked directly into the window. Raised one finger to his lips. And silently mouthed two words. Don't remember. Before Elias could react. The church bell rang. Not once. Not twice. But 13 times. Each chime echoed across the valley like thunder. The lamps inside every house went dark. Every window. Every candle. Every fireplace. Instantly. Ashmere vanished into complete darkness. Except for one faint light. Coming from beneath the church itself. As the final bell echoed into silence. A child's voice whispered from somewhere inside his room. You weren't supposed to see yourself this early. Elias spun around. The room was empty. Then. The wardrobe door slowly creaked open on its own. Inside. Someone was breathing. Welcome back to Sleepless Historian Salavora. Some mysteries wait patiently for curious people. Others defend themselves. Tonight, Elias Rowan will discover that Ashmere has been hiding something beneath its church for nearly 2 centuries. But the greatest danger is no longer the village. It is the version of himself that already knows the ending. So settle in, keep the lights low, and return with us to the valley that history abandoned. The breathing inside the wardrobe grew slower. Steady. Deliberate. As though whoever stood inside knew Elias was afraid. The room had become impossibly cold. His candle burned with a pale blue flame. Every shadow stretched longer than it should. Elias reached for the heavy iron poker beside the fireplace. His grip tightened. Slowly. He stepped toward the wardrobe. One step. Another. The breathing stopped. Silence. He grabbed the wooden handle. Pulled the door open. Inside. Nothing. Only neatly folded blankets. An old traveling cloak. A pair of worn leather boots. No person. No hiding place. No secret door. Yet the air inside the wardrobe was warmer than the rest of the room. Almost as though someone had been standing there only seconds earlier. He searched every corner. Nothing. When he turned around. The wardrobe door closed by itself. A knock echoed through the room. 3 slow knocks. Elias opened the door. The elderly woman stood outside holding a brass lantern. I thought you might still be awake. I heard someone inside my room. She nodded calmly. Yes. You say that every time. Again. Every time. The words were beginning to feel heavier. She entered without waiting for permission. The lantern illuminated the journal on the desk. She looked at it sadly. So you found it. It belongs to me. It belonged to you. There is a difference. Elias closed the notebook. I need answers. So does everyone who arrives here. She placed the lantern on the table. My name is Margaret. I have lived in Ashmere for 81 years. Then she smiled faintly. Or perhaps 181. Elias stared at her. That's impossible. Yes. It is. She sounded almost amused. Outside, the wind carried the scent of wet pine through the open window. Margaret walked toward it. You see the mountains? They never move. The river? It never changes. The trees? They grow exactly as trees should. Then she turned back toward him. Only time behaves differently here. Elias felt a chill. What do you mean? Margaret did not answer immediately. Instead, she pointed toward the church tower. Tomorrow morning. You'll climb those stairs. You'll discover something beneath the bell. You'll think you've solved everything. You'll be wrong. She spoke with absolute certainty. Not like a prediction. Like a memory. Elias suddenly remembered the strange man in the graveyard. The man outside. He looked exactly like me. Margaret's expression changed. For the first time, genuine fear appeared in her eyes. You saw him already? Yes. She whispered something too quietly to hear. What? She looked directly at him. Then we're running out of time. She removed an old key from around her neck. Unlike the brass key Elias had received in the mysterious package. This one was black. Smooth. Strangely warm. It opens the crypt. Beneath the church. Margaret nodded. But promise me something. What? If you find a clock. Never let it strike midnight. Elias frowned. A clock. The oldest one you've ever seen. What happens if it reaches midnight? Margaret looked away. You begin again. Before Elias could ask another question. The church bell rang once. A deep, lonely sound rolled across the valley. Margaret froze. He knows you're here. Who? The bell keeper. The bell keeper. Margaret extinguished her lantern. The room plunged into darkness. Be quiet. Footsteps echoed outside. Heavy. Slow. Metal striking stone. Clang. Step. Clang. Step. The sound came from the hallway. Someone was walking toward Elias's room. The footsteps stopped outside the door. Neither of them breathed. A shadow appeared beneath the doorway. Tall. Perfectly still. Then came a voice. Low. Calm. Almost gentle. Elias. No answer. I know you're awake. Silence. I've been waiting a very long time. The doorknob began to turn. Very slowly. Margaret whispered. Do not answer. The handle stopped halfway. Then the voice spoke again. If you open the door, I'll tell you how many times you've already died. Elias's heartbeat pounded in his ears. Margaret grabbed his wrist so tightly it hurt. No. Whatever you hear. Do not open it. For nearly a full minute. Nothing happened. Then the footsteps continued down the hallway. Clang. Step. Clang. Step. Until they disappeared. Only after several minutes did Margaret relight the lantern. Her hands were shaking. You've never heard him speak this early before. You know him? No. I've only heard his voice. No one has ever seen his face. Not and remembered it. Unable to sleep, Elias waited until dawn. The valley looked beautiful beneath the morning mist. Villagers greeted one another with cheerful smiles. Children chased geese through the square. Life seemed perfectly ordinary. Too ordinary. He walked toward the church. No one stopped him. The ancient oak doors stood open. Inside, sunlight streamed through colorful stained glass windows. Dust floated peacefully in the air. An elderly priest knelt in silent prayer. He looked up as Elias entered. I've been expecting you. Elias almost laughed. So everyone keeps telling me. The priest smiled. It saves introductions. The church was older than the village itself. Massive stone columns supported a ceiling blackened by centuries of candle smoke. Carvings covered nearly every wall. Angels. Kings. Stars. And one strange symbol repeated dozens of times. A circle. Surrounding a bell. At its center. An eye. Watching. The priest noticed Elias studying the carving. We don't worship it. Then why is it everywhere? Because we're afraid to forget it. Elias climbed the narrow spiral staircase toward the bell tower. Each step creaked beneath his weight. Halfway up, he noticed something carved into the stone wall. It wasn't ancient. The letters looked fresh. He brushed away the dust. The message was written in his own handwriting. If you reach the top, do not look down. Elias stared at the words. His pulse quickened. Someone, or something, had left him a warning. And once again, it was written by himself. Ignoring the message, he climbed the final steps. Sunlight poured through the tower windows. The massive bronze bell hung silently above him. Its surface was covered with names. Hundreds of names. Each carved by hand. Some were faded with age. Others looked recent. Then Elias found one name carved deeper than all the others. Elias Rowan. Not once. Not twice. But 47 times. Every carving was made with a different style. A different depth. A different age. As though 47 different versions of him had stood in this exact place. Across many lifetimes. Across many years. And every one of them had left the same name behind. Then, against every warning, Elias looked over the edge of the tower. His blood froze. The village below was completely empty. No people. No animals. No smoke. No movement. Ashmere had vanished. But from every street, every doorway, every rooftop, hundreds of identical men were slowly looking up at him. Every one of them had Elias's face. Welcome back to Sleepless Historian Salavora. Every mystery eventually reaches a moment where logic begins to fail. For Elias Rowan, that moment has arrived. Below him stands an entire village filled with his own face. Above him hangs a bell that has already spoken his name. And somewhere beneath the church, something has been waiting for almost 200 years to be remembered. Let's continue. Elias stumbled backward from the edge of the bell tower. His breathing became uneven. His hands shook so violently that he nearly lost his balance. He looked down again. Nothing. The village had returned to normal. Children chased each other through the square. Farmers loaded wagons. The baker waved cheerfully to a passing customer. No identical faces. No empty streets. Only ordinary life. For several seconds Elias wondered if exhaustion had finally overcome him. Then he heard footsteps behind him. He turned sharply. The tower was empty. Yet a fresh line had appeared on the dusty stone floor. Someone had traced it with a finger. The words were simple. You look down. The dust was still settling. Whoever had written the message had done so only moments before. A cold wind swept through the tower. The great bronze bell moved gently. Not enough to ring. Just enough to groan. A deep metallic sound echoed through the stone chamber. Then another sentence appeared beneath the first. The dust shifted by itself. Invisible fingertips carved fresh letters. Now the village knows you remember. Elias backed away. For the first time in years, he considered abandoning everything. The map. The journal. The village. Every instinct screamed at him to leave Ashmere immediately. He rushed down the spiral staircase. The elderly priest was waiting at the bottom. You looked over the edge. It wasn't a question. Elias stared. How do you know? The priest sighed. They always do. They. The curious ones. He picked up a broom and quietly swept the church floor. As soon as someone looks, the cycle changes. What cycle? The priest leaned against the broom. Tell me. What year is it? 1847. The priest smiled sadly. So you still believe that? He walked toward a narrow stained glass window. Morning sunlight illuminated his weathered face. My father was born in Ashmere. So was his father. And his father before him. We have buried 6 generations beneath this church. He paused. None of them ever left. Elias frowned. That doesn't explain anything. No. It doesn't. The priest lowered his voice. Come with me. He led Elias to the altar. Behind it stood an enormous stone cross. The priest pressed one of its carved flowers. A dull grinding noise echoed beneath the floor. The stone altar slowly slid aside. Cold air rushed upward. Hidden beneath the church lay a staircase descending into darkness. The priest handed Elias an oil lantern. I cannot go farther. Why not? Because I already did. What happened? The priest looked away. I came back older. The staircase seemed endless. Each step had been worn smooth by countless feet. The air smelled of damp stone and ancient wood. Water dripped rhythmically somewhere below. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. The staircase finally opened into a vast underground chamber. Elias raised his lantern. Shelves. Hundreds of shelves. Stretching farther than the light could reach. Each shelf held journals. Thousands of them. Every journal was identical to the one in his room. Leather cover. Brass clasp. Same size. Same color. He approached the nearest shelf. The spine read. Elias Rowan. Another. Elias Rowan. Another. Elias Rowan. Again. And again. And again. Every journal bore his name. His heartbeat echoed through the chamber. He removed one at random. Inside. His handwriting. Different dates. Different observations. Different endings. One journal ended after only 3 days. Another continued for nearly 12 years. Another stopped in the middle of a sentence. Some pages were stained with mud. Others with dried blood. One journal had burn marks along its edges. Another had pages eaten by insects. Every one told the story of Ashmere. Every one belonged to Elias. But none matched the notebook in his satchel. A soft voice drifted through the darkness. Don't waste time reading those. Elias spun around. The other Elias stood only a few feet away. The same coat. The same boots. The same tired eyes. Only one difference. His hair had turned completely white. Yet his face looked no older than 40. You. The older Elias nodded. Yes. I know. You have questions. Who are you? I'm you. No. You're impossible. The older Elias smiled faintly. I said exactly that. He walked past the shelves. Running one hand gently across the journals. I wrote most of these. You can't. I did. When? The older Elias looked toward the darkness beyond the library. Tomorrow. Silence filled the chamber. Elias tried to make sense of the answer. It was impossible. And yet. Nothing in Ashmere had obeyed ordinary rules. The older Elias stopped beside an ancient wooden table. On it rested a large pocket watch unlike any Elias had ever seen. It was nearly the size of a dinner plate. Its brass surface was blackened with age. The hands moved strangely. Sometimes forward. Sometimes backward. Sometimes not at all. This, the older Elias whispered, is the heart of Ashmere. You mean the clock Margaret warned me about? The older Elias looked surprised. So she still remembers. Remembers what? That we're trying to save everyone. You'll understand. He gently touched the enormous watch. Immediately, the entire chamber trembled. Dust fell from the ceiling. Far above, the church bell rang once. The older Elias closed his eyes. We're late. Before Elias could ask another question, every journal on every shelf suddenly opened. Thousands of pages began turning by themselves. The sound was overwhelming. Like a hurricane made of paper. Words lifted from the pages. Ink floated into the air like black smoke. The letters circled the chamber, forming impossible shapes. Names. Dates. Maps. Faces. Entire paragraphs drifted through the darkness before dissolving again. Elias shielded his eyes. Then he noticed something terrifying. The floating words weren't random. They were rewriting his notebook. The journal in his satchel opened on its own. Blank pages filled with fresh ink. Sentences appeared without anyone writing them. He grabbed the notebook. The newest page contained only one line. You have exactly 3 bell rings left before Ashmere chooses which Elias survives. The ink was still wet. A deafening boom shook the underground chamber. The first bell rang. The ancient pocket watch skipped backward by 1 minute. The older Elias's expression changed instantly. We have to move. Move where? To the room that was never built. What does that even mean? You'll see. From somewhere deep beneath the stone floor, something enormous exhaled. The sound was slow. Ancient. Far too large to belong to any human being. Then came another sound. A heavy iron door. Opening by itself somewhere in the darkness. The older Elias whispered only 4 words. He finally woke up. Welcome back to Sleepless Historian Salavora. History remembers kings. It remembers wars. It remembers revolutions. But beneath the forgotten village of Ashmere, history has been remembering one ordinary man. Over and over again. Tonight, Elias Rowan will finally discover why thousands of journals bear his name, why the bell always rings before tomorrow, and why something beneath the earth has just awakened. If you're ready, let's continue. The second the ancient iron door groaned open, every lantern in the underground library dimmed. Darkness did not simply fill the room. It spread. Like black ink dissolving through clear water. The shelves seemed farther away than before. The ceiling disappeared into shadow. Even the echoes changed. The chamber no longer sounded empty. It sounded occupied. The older Elias immediately extinguished his lantern. What are you doing? Whispered Elias. The light tells it where we are. What is it? The older Elias didn't answer. Instead, he listened. A deep metallic scraping echoed through the darkness. Not footsteps. Not claws. Something heavier. As though enormous chains were being dragged across stone that had not been disturbed for centuries. The sound came once. Then again. Closer. Follow me. The older Elias hurried between endless rows of journals. Without a lantern, Elias could barely see. Yet strangely, the older version of himself never hesitated. He knew every turn. Every corridor. Every hidden passage. As if he had walked this maze hundreds of times. Perhaps. He had. Minutes later they reached a circular chamber unlike anything Elias had seen. Its walls were covered with enormous maps. Not maps of countries. Maps of time. Years stretched across the parchment like rivers. 1814. 1815. 1816. 1817. 1818. Dates from centuries apart crossed one another in impossible patterns. Thin red threads connected them. Some threads ended abruptly. Others circled back upon themselves. At the center of the room stood a massive wooden table. Carved into its surface was the map of Ashmere. Except the village wasn't alone. Hundreds of faint outlines surrounded it. Different versions. Different streets. Different churches. Different bridges. Different futures. The older Elias rested both hands on the table. This, he said quietly, is every Ashmere that almost existed. Elias stared. What does that mean? It means history keeps trying to correct one mistake. What mistake? The older Elias looked directly into his eyes. You. Silence. I don't understand. I know. I didn't either. The older Elias pointed toward one tiny mark on the map. This is the day you arrived. Another mark. This is the day you entered the church. Another. This is the day you rang the bell. I never rang the bell. Not yet. The words echoed through the chamber. Not yet. Again. Always that phrase. The older Elias pulled open a narrow drawer beneath the table. Inside rested dozens of pocket watches. Every one stopped at a different time. Some were rusted. Others gleamed as though newly made. Each watch had a name engraved on its back. Elias opened one. His own name. Another. His own name. Another. Again. Every watch belonged to him. Every time you fail. The older Elias whispered. Time leaves one behind. A sudden tremor shook the room. Dust rained from the ceiling. Far above. The church bell rang again. The second bell. Every watch inside the drawer ticked once. Exactly together. The older Elias went pale. Only one ring remains. What happens after the third? The older Elias closed the drawer. The village decides. Decides what? Which version of you deserves to remember? Before Elias could speak, a child's laughter echoed through the chamber. Soft. Happy. Completely out of place. Neither of them moved. The laughter came again. Closer. A small boy stepped from behind one of the shelves. He couldn't have been older than 8. Brown hair. Blue eyes. Simple gray clothes. He smiled warmly. Hello, Elias. The older Elias immediately knelt. You shouldn't be here. The boy giggled. I know. He looked at the younger Elias. You finally came back. I've never met you. You always forget me. The boy reached into his pocket. He removed a tiny wooden whistle. It was carved in the shape of a bell. You gave me this. I did. Tomorrow. Again. Tomorrow. Every answer pointed toward a future that had somehow already happened. The older Elias gently took the whistle. You have to leave. The boy's smile slowly disappeared. It's too late. No. It isn't. The boy shook his head sadly. He crossed the threshold. He looked down. He opened the library. He found the table. The child looked toward the darkness beyond the chamber. He knows. The scraping sound returned. Only this time. It was much louder. The walls vibrated. The journals on nearby shelves trembled. One by one, they fell to the floor. Thousands of pages scattered across the stone. Wind rushed through the underground passages. Except there was no wind. The air was moving toward something. As though the darkness itself were breathing. The older Elias whispered. "Run." None of them moved. The scraping stopped. Silence. Then, a voice emerged from the darkness. Deep. Ancient. Impossible to locate. I have counted. A pause. 47. Another pause. But now, there are 48. Every lantern went out. The chamber became pitch black. Only the enormous timeline maps began glowing faintly. Thin golden lines spread across them like cracks in glass. One glowing line reached the year 1847. Then continued forward. 1848. 1849. 1850. For the first time, the line moved beyond every previous ending. The older Elias stared in disbelief. "No." He whispered. "That has never happened." "What hasn't?" The older Elias slowly smiled. For the first time since meeting him, there was hope in his eyes. "You changed something. I don't know how. But history just moved." Before Elias could ask what he meant, the little boy suddenly screamed. A black hand, far longer than any human arm, shot out from the darkness. It seized the child by the ankle. The older Elias lunged forward. Too late. The boy was dragged across the stone floor toward the unseen corridor. His fingers clawed desperately at the ground. "Elias!" he cried. "You promised this time would be different." The whistle slipped from his hand. It landed at Elias's feet. Then, the darkness swallowed the child. Silence returned. Only the whistle remained. Elias picked it up with trembling hands. On its side, someone had carved a tiny sentence so small he almost missed it. It read, "When the third bell rings, do not let Elias answer." But there were two Eliases standing in the chamber. And for the first time, neither of them knew which Elias the warning was meant for. Welcome back to Sleepless Historian Salavora. There are stories that end with answers. Then there are stories where every answer opens another locked door. The child has vanished. Only one bell remains. And somewhere beneath Ashmere, something ancient has started counting again. Tonight, the final bell draws closer. Let's continue. Neither Elias spoke. The tiny wooden whistle rested in the younger Elias's hand. It felt strangely warm. Almost alive. The older Elias stared toward the corridor where the child had disappeared. His face had become completely expressionless. Not because he felt nothing. Because he had seen this happen before. Many times. "You knew him," the younger Elias said quietly. The older Elias nodded. "His name was Thomas." "Was?" "I stopped using the word is a long time ago. You said I gave him this whistle." "I did." "You will." The younger Elias closed his eyes. Every answer still belonged to a future he hadn't lived. Without another word, the older Elias picked up one of the fallen journals. He opened it near the end. Most pages were faded. Some had burned edges. He stopped on a page covered in hurried handwriting. "Listen." He began reading aloud. Day 312. Thomas remembers every timeline. That is why the keeper fears him. Children born inside Ashmere do not experience time the way adults do. They dream tomorrow before sleeping tonight. Thomas has already watched me fail 41 times. Yet every morning, he still smiles. The older Elias gently closed the journal. I wrote that. The younger Elias whispered. So Thomas wasn't imagining things. No. He knew every version of us. A low vibration rolled beneath the stone floor. Not violent. Steady. Like the heartbeat of something enormous buried far below. The shelves trembled again. Dust drifted through the air. Far away. Another bell answered. Not the church bell. A smaller one. Then another. Then another. Soon dozens of unseen bells echoed through the underground passages. Some sounded near. Others impossibly distant. The younger Elias looked around. Where are those coming from? The older Elias replied softly. From the ashmeres that failed. The words hung in the air. There are other ashmeres. The older Elias nodded. You saw their outlines on the map. Each time history collapses, a new path is created. Most survive only a few weeks. Some last centuries. And ours? The older Elias didn't answer immediately. Finally, he whispered. Ours has lasted the longest. The whistle suddenly vibrated in the younger Elias's hand. A faint musical note escaped it. No one had blown into it. Both men looked at it. Tiny glowing letters slowly appeared across the wooden surface. Follow the sound. The older Elias looked surprised. It never did that before. What does it mean? I don't know. For the first time, he truly sounded uncertain. The whistle produced another soft note. This time, the sound did not echo. Instead, it traveled down one particular tunnel. As though pointing the way. The two Eliases exchanged a glance. Then followed it. The passage narrowed. Its walls were older than the church itself. Strange symbols covered the stone. Circles. Eyes. Bells. And beneath them, the same sentence repeated hundreds of times in different languages. Do not wake the listener. Latin. Old English. Gaelic. French. Arabic. Greek. Languages Elias recognized. And dozens he did not. Some inscriptions looked thousands of years old. Others had been carved recently. One message, however, stood apart. Fresh. Still sharp. Written in Elias's own handwriting. I woke it. The younger Elias froze. I never wrote this. You haven't. The older Elias touched the carving gently. But you will. The tunnel finally opened into an enormous underground cavern. Its ceiling disappeared into darkness. A vast underground lake stretched before them. The water was perfectly still. Not a ripple disturbed its surface. In the center of the lake stood a small stone island. Upon it, a single oak tree. Its branches were completely bare. No leaves. No fruit. Yet beneath the tree sat an old wooden chair. Occupied. Someone was already there. The figure faced away from them. Motionless. Watching the lake. Who is that? Whispered the younger Elias. The older Elias went pale. I've never reached this place before. What? I've searched for it in dozens of timelines. But it was always gone. He swallowed. This is new. The whistle sounded again. The seated figure slowly stood. Very slowly. Too slowly. As though every movement carried the weight of centuries. He turned. The younger Elias felt his stomach tighten. The man looked exactly like him. Again. But this version was older than the other Elias. far older. His beard reached the middle of his chest. Deep scars crossed his face. One eye was clouded white. His coat had faded almost completely. Yet despite the years, there was no doubt. It was another Elias. He smiled sadly across the water. I was beginning to think you wouldn't make it. The younger Elias looked from one version of himself to the other. How many of us are there? The old man answered. I stopped counting after 70. The older Elias whispered. That's impossible. The old man smiled. So I believed. He pointed toward the lake. Come across. There isn't a bridge. You won't need one. The younger Elias looked at the water. Its surface reflected not the cavern, but the night sky. Stars shimmered beneath his feet. He cautiously stepped forward. Instead of sinking, his boot rested on the surface as though it were solid glass. The older Elias followed. Neither spoke. Each step sent circles of light rippling beneath them. Not water. Memories. Faces appeared beneath the surface. Margaret. Thomas. The priest. Malcolm. Hundreds of unfamiliar people. Each looked upward, as though trapped beneath the lake. Watching. Waiting. When they reached the island, the oldest Elias remained standing beneath the bare oak. You've come farther than any version before you. The younger Elias asked. Who are you? The old man answered quietly. I am the last Elias. Silence. I am the only one who reached the end. The end of what? The story. Before either Elias could speak again, the ancient oak tree began to tremble. Its empty branches rattled violently despite the still air. A single bronze bell, hidden among the branches, began to swing. The oldest Elias looked up. His expression filled with dread. No. It found us. The bell moved faster. Faster. Then, without anyone touching it, it rang. Not the third bell. A different one. Lower. Older. Its sound spread across the lake. The reflections beneath the surface suddenly opened their eyes. Every trapped face looked directly at the younger Elias. Together, they whispered a single sentence. He's listening now. At that exact moment, something unimaginably vast stirred beneath the lake. The perfectly smooth surface bulged upward. Not from one place. From everywhere. As if an entire mountain was slowly rising from below. Welcome back to Sleepless Historian Salavora. Some legends warn us never to look into deep water. Not because we might fall in, but because something far below might notice us first. Tonight, beneath the forgotten valley of Ashmere, three versions of Elias Rowan stand together for the first time. And beneath the silent lake, the listener has awakened. Let's continue. The lake rose another inch. Then another. Not with waves. Not with bubbles. The entire surface lifted as one enormous sheet, as though an invisible hand were pushing upward from the depths. The reflections vanished. The stars dissolved into darkness. Only one thing remained visible beneath the water. A single eye. It was impossible to judge its size. At first Elias believed it belonged to an ordinary creature. Then he noticed the pupil alone was wider than the stone island. The iris shimmered with countless faint lights. They were not stars. They were memories. Faces. Cities. Entire lifetimes drifted within it like leaves carried by a river. The youngest Elias felt an overwhelming pressure inside his mind. Not pain. Recognition. The eye wasn't looking at him. It was remembering him. The oldest Elias removed his weathered hat. For the first time since they had met, He bowed his head. It remembers every promise. The younger Elias whispered. What is it? The oldest Elias answered without lifting his eyes. It has been called many names. The Watcher. The Sleepless One. The Archivist. But none of those are correct. He looked toward the immense eye. It doesn't watch history. It stores it. The younger Elias struggled to understand. You mean? The oldest Elias nodded. Every moment that has ever happened. Every word ever spoken. Every choice. It remembers them all. The older Elias, the one with white hair, stared in disbelief. So Ashmere was built above it. The oldest Elias sighed. No. Ashmere was built because of it. The eye slowly blinked. The sound echoed across the cavern like distant thunder. When it opened again, the lake had changed. Instead of water, the surface now reflected different moments in time. A Roman soldier crossing a bridge. A Viking ship disappearing into thick fog. A child laughing beside a windmill. A woman writing a letter by candlelight. Scenes changed every heartbeat. Thousands. Millions. History flowed beneath their feet. Then the images stopped. Only one remained. The younger Elias. Standing exactly where he was. Watching himself. The youngest Elias felt cold. Why is it showing me? The oldest Elias answered quietly. Because it wants to know. Know what? If you will repeat us. A voice rolled across the lake. It came from nowhere. And everywhere. It was neither male nor female. Neither young nor old. It sounded like countless voices speaking together. Elias Rowan. None of the three answered. The voice continued. Which one? Silence. The oldest Elias slowly stepped forward. I am enough. The great eye shifted toward him. For a long moment. Nothing happened. Then the voice replied. You were. The oldest Elias closed his eyes. Almost peacefully. I know. Without warning. The ground beneath him cracked. Thin lines of golden light spread through the stone. The oldest Elias looked back at the other two. There was no fear in his expression. Only acceptance. You must listen carefully. The younger Elias rushed toward him. What is happening? The island only allows one ending. No. There has to be another way. The old man smiled. I've spent longer searching than you can imagine. I've crossed centuries that never existed. I've watched entire kingdoms appear and disappear between two bell rings. And every path leads here. The cracks widened. Pieces of stone began falling into the lake. Instead of splashing, they disappeared silently. As though the water had erased them. The oldest Elias reached into his coat. He removed a folded piece of parchment. Its edges had become almost transparent with age. I wrote this before I forgot how. He handed it to the youngest Elias. Do not read it. What? Not yet. When? When the third bell begins. Begins? The old man nodded. The third bell doesn't ring once. It continues until someone answers. The younger Elias carefully placed the parchment inside his satchel. I don't understand any of this. I know. You weren't meant to. The listener spoke again. This time more softly. One memory must remain. The lake began glowing. Thin threads of light rose from its surface. Each thread connected to one of the three Eliases. The youngest thread shone bright gold. The older Elias's thread glowed silver. The oldest barely glimmered at all. The oldest Elias looked at his fading thread and smiled. So. It's finally my turn. The silver thread around the older Elias suddenly tightened. He gasped. Memories flooded into his eyes. He staggered backward. I remember. He whispered. I remember everything. His face turned pale. There weren't 47. There were 72. He looked at the youngest Elias in horror. We were wrong. It wasn't us who kept failing. It was Ashmere. The ground shook violently. The great eye beneath the lake narrowed. The voice echoed through the cavern. Correction rejected. The silver thread snapped. The older Elias cried out. Blood trickled from one ear. He collapsed to one knee, clutching his head. My memories. They're disappearing. The oldest Elias whispered. It knows. It heard you. A deep metallic sound echoed from somewhere far above. Not from the underground bell. Not from the oak tree. From the church itself. The real church. The familiar bell tower. The final bell had begun to move. Very slowly. The youngest Elias felt the whistle in his pocket vibrating violently. The ancient pocket watch inside his satchel sprang open by itself. Its hands raced backward. Every journal they had carried fluttered open. Ink lifted from the pages. Words filled the air like a swarm of black birds. The oldest Elias looked toward the cavern ceiling. His voice was barely a whisper. The third bell has started. At that exact moment, a distant chime rolled through the mountain. Not loud. Not sharp. Slow. Heavy. As though time itself had struck bronze. And somewhere above, in the sleeping village of Ashmere, someone had begun pulling the bell rope. Welcome back to Sleepless historian Salavora. Some legends warn us never to look into deep water. Not because we might fall in, but because something far below might notice us first. Tonight, beneath the forgotten valley of Ashmere, three versions of Elias Rowan stand together for the first time. And beneath the silent lake, the listener has awakened. Let's continue. The lake rose another inch. Then another. Not with waves. Not with bubbles. The entire surface lifted as one enormous sheet, as though an invisible hand were pushing upward from the depths. The reflections vanished. The stars dissolved into darkness. Only one thing remained visible beneath the water. A single eye. It was impossible to judge its size. At first Elias believed it belonged to an ordinary creature. Then he noticed the pupil alone was wider than the stone island. The iris shimmered with countless faint lights. They were not stars. They were memories. Faces. Cities. Entire lifetimes drifted within it like leaves carried by a river. The youngest Elias felt an overwhelming pressure inside his mind. Not pain. Recognition. The eye wasn't looking at him. It was remembering him. The oldest Elias removed his weathered hat. For the first time since they had met, he bowed his head. It remembers every promise. The younger Elias whispered. What is it? The oldest Elias answered without lifting his eyes. It has been called many names. The Watcher. The Sleepless One. The Archivist. But none of those are correct. He looked toward the immense eye. It doesn't watch history. It stores it. The younger Elias struggled to understand. You mean? The oldest Elias nodded. Every moment that has ever happened. Every word ever spoken. Every choice. It remembers them all. The older Elias, the one with white hair, stared in disbelief. So Ashmere was built above it. The oldest Elias sighed. No. Ashmere was built because of it. The eye slowly blinked. The sound echoed across the cavern like distant thunder. When it opened again, the lake had changed. Instead of water, the surface now reflected different moments in time. A Roman soldier crossing a bridge. A Viking ship disappearing into thick fog. A child laughing beside a windmill. A woman writing a letter by candlelight. Scenes changed every heartbeat. Thousands. Millions. History flowed beneath their feet. Then the images stopped. Only one remained. The younger Elias. Standing exactly where he was. Watching himself. The youngest Elias felt cold. Why is it showing me? The oldest Elias answered quietly. Because it wants to know. Know what? If you will repeat us. A voice rolled across the lake. It came from nowhere. And everywhere. It was neither male nor female. Neither young nor old. It sounded like countless voices speaking together. Elias Rowan. None of the three answered. The voice continued. Which one? Silence. The oldest Elias slowly stepped forward. I am enough. The great I shifted toward him. For a long moment. Nothing happened. Then the voice replied. You were. The oldest Elias closed his eyes. Almost peacefully. I know. Without warning. The ground beneath him cracked. Thin lines of golden light spread through the stone. The oldest Elias looked back at the other two. There was no fear in his expression. Only acceptance. You must listen carefully. The younger Elias rushed toward him. What is happening? The island only allows one ending. No. There has to be another way. The old man smiled. I've spent longer searching than you can imagine. I've crossed centuries that never existed. I've watched entire kingdoms appear and disappear between two bell rings. And every path leads here. The cracks widened. Pieces of stone began falling into the lake. Instead of splashing, they disappeared silently. As though the water had erased them. The oldest Elias reached into his coat. He removed a folded piece of parchment. Its edges had become almost transparent with age. I wrote this before I forgot how. He handed it to the youngest Elias. Do not read it. What? Not yet. When? When the third bell begins. Begins. The old man nodded. The third bell doesn't ring once. It continues until someone answers. The younger Elias carefully placed the parchment inside his satchel. I don't understand any of this. I know. You weren't meant to. The listener spoke again. This time more softly. One memory must remain. The lake began glowing. Thin threads of light rose from its surface. Each thread connected to one of the three Eliases. The youngest thread shone bright gold. The older Elias's thread glowed silver. The oldest barely glimmered at all. The oldest Elias looked at his fading thread and smiled. So. It's finally my turn. The silver thread around the older Elias suddenly tightened. He gasped. Memories flooded into his eyes. He staggered backward. I remember. He whispered. I remember everything. His face turned pale. There weren't 47. There were 72. He looked at the youngest Elias in horror. We were wrong. It wasn't us who kept failing. It was Ashmere. The ground shook violently. The great eye beneath the lake narrowed. The voice echoed through the cavern. Correction rejected. The silver thread snapped. The older Elias cried out. Blood trickled from one ear. He collapsed to one knee, clutching his head. My memories. They're disappearing. The oldest Elias whispered. It knows. It heard you. A deep metallic sound echoed from somewhere far above. Not from the underground bell. Not from the oak tree. From the church itself. The real church. The familiar bell tower. The final bell had begun to move. Very slowly. The youngest Elias felt the whistle in his pocket vibrating violently. The ancient pocket watch inside his satchel sprang open by itself. Its hands raced backward. Every journal they had carried fluttered open. Ink lifted from the pages. Words filled the air like a swarm of black birds. The oldest Elias looked toward the cavern ceiling. His voice was barely a whisper. The third bell has started. At that exact moment, a distant chime rolled through the mountain. Not loud. Not sharp. Slow. Heavy. As though time itself had struck bronze. And somewhere above, in the sleeping village of Ashmere, someone had begun pulling the bell rope. For centuries, the people of Ashmere believed the third bell was a warning. They were wrong. It was never a warning. It was a question. And tonight, someone has finally begun answering it. Let's continue. The first note of the third bell refused to end. It lingered through the cavern like an endless breath. Stone walls vibrated. The underground lake shimmered. Even the air seemed to bend around the sound. The youngest Elias pressed his hands against his ears. It made no difference. The bell wasn't entering through hearing. It was entering through memory. Suddenly, he remembered standing inside the church. Only it wasn't today. Rain hammered the roof. Margaret stood beside him. Thomas was laughing. The priest was younger. The older Elias had dark hair. Then the vision disappeared. Another arrived immediately. A different church. The altar faced the opposite direction. The stained glass windows were blue instead of red. Ashmere looked different. Different timeline. Different attempt. Another memory. Snow covered the village. The bell tower had collapsed. Smoke filled the streets. Dozens of people were running. A young Elias pulled desperately at the bell rope. Then darkness. The vision struck faster. Hundreds. Thousands. Each lasted only a heartbeat. Each showed another version of Ashmere. Some peaceful. Some abandoned. Some consumed by fire. One lay beneath the sea. Another stood in the middle of an endless desert. In every version, there was always an Elias. Always searching. Always arriving too late. Always believing he was the first. The oldest Elias closed his eyes. It has opened the archive. The younger Elias struggled to breathe. The archive? The place where every forgotten possibility survives. The older Elias slowly stood again. His face had changed. I remember now. His voice trembled. We weren't brought here. We created this. The youngest Elias stared. What? The older Elias looked directly at him. Ashmere wasn't hiding from history. History was hiding from Ashmere. The great eye beneath the lake narrowed. Its enormous pupil reflected only one image now. The church bell. Swinging. Back and forth. Back and forth. Without stopping. The voice returned. Answer. No one moved. Again. Answer. The sound of the third bell deepened. Somewhere far above, the people of Ashmere were gathering. Though none of the three Eliases could see them. They all knew. Every villager had left their homes. Every lantern had been extinguished. Every road now led toward the church. The whistle in Elias's pocket suddenly played a melody by itself. A tune unlike any he had ever heard. Soft. Hopeful. almost like a lullaby. The listener fell silent. The ice stopped moving. The lake became perfectly still. The oldest Elias looked astonished. Thomas. He smiled sadly. He remembered. The melody continued. Across the lake. The bare oak tree began growing leaves. Tiny green buds appeared along branches that had been lifeless for centuries. One leaf. Then another. Within seconds. The tree was covered in vibrant green. A single white flower bloomed near its highest branch. The oldest Elias whispered. "I've never seen that before." The flower slowly opened. Inside rested a small bronze key. Unlike the black key Margaret had carried. This one shone brilliantly. It looked new. Untouched by time. The key floated gently downward. Landing in the youngest Elias's hands. The moment he touched it. A name appeared along its side. Not his own. It read. Thomas. The older Elias frowned. There was never another key. There is now, the oldest Elias replied. The story is changing. Suddenly. Every journal in the underground library slammed shut at once. The sound echoed like cannon fire through the tunnels. The third bell paused. Just for an instant. The listener spoke again. This time. Its voice carried something it had never shown before. Curiosity. Impossible. The oldest Elias smiled. No. Unwritten. Without warning. The surface of the lake shattered. Not into water. Into glass. Millions of glowing fragments floated into the air. Inside every fragment. A different memory played. Thomas carving the wooden whistle. Margaret planting flowers beside the bridge. Malcolm handing over the silver pocket watch. The priest opening the hidden staircase. Children laughing in the village square. Then. One fragment drifted toward the youngest Elias. It showed something he had never experienced. A small cottage. A fireplace. A woman reading a book. A little girl asleep beside her. The younger Elias watched silently. Who are they? The oldest Elias looked away. The life you were supposed to have. Before another word could be spoken. The fragment cracked. The image vanished. The cavern shook more violently than ever before. High above. The third bell rang again. This time. It was answered. Not by one voice. By hundreds. The voices of the villagers echoed through the mountain. Together they spoke the same sentence. We remember. The listener's eye widened. For the first time. It looked afraid. Then the church bell suddenly stopped. Complete silence. The oldest Elias whispered. No. It answered back. The younger Elias frowned. What answered? From somewhere deep beneath the lake. Far below even the listener. Another bell began to ring. Older. Slower. And infinitely louder. The sound did not shake the cavern. It shook time itself. The oldest Elias's smile disappeared. I prayed. That bell was only a legend. The people of Ashmere believed there was only one bell beneath their village. They were mistaken. The first bell called travelers. The second bell awakened memories. The third bell asked a question. But somewhere deeper. Older than the church. Older than the valley. Something else has just begun to ring. And no journal ever mentioned it. Let's continue. The new bell sounded only once. Yet its echo refused to fade. Instead, the sound traveled downward. Into places even the listener seemed unwilling to remember. The enormous eye beneath the lake slowly closed. Not from sleep. From fear. The youngest Elias stared. The listener is afraid? The oldest Elias nodded. There is only one thing it has never been able to record. What? The moment before history begins. The cavern trembled again. This time, the movement came from below the lake. Great cracks of pale blue light spread beneath the glass-like surface. The reflections vanished. Every memory dissolved into a blank white glow. The oldest Elias whispered. "It's opening." "What is?" He answered without looking away. "The foundation." A low rumble echoed through the mountain. Slowly. The center of the underground lake began sinking. Not collapsing. Opening. Like the petals of an enormous stone flower. Layer after layer folded away. Revealing a spiral staircase descending into pure darkness. No bottom could be seen. Cold air rose from the opening. It carried no scent. No moisture. Nothing. It was the smell of a place untouched by time. The bronze key marked Thomas grew warm in the youngest Elias's hand. Then it pulled gently toward the staircase. As if it already knew where it belonged. The older Elias looked uneasy. "I've never seen that passage." The oldest Elias gave a faint smile. "Neither had I." "So this really is different." "Yes. For the first time. The story has written a page that none of us remember." Without another word, the three Eliases began descending. Each step felt strangely soft beneath their boots. The stone was perfectly smooth. No dust. No cracks. No signs of age. After several minutes, they realized something unsettling. Their footsteps made no sound. Neither did their breathing. Even the distant bells had disappeared. It was as if the staircase absorbed every noise. The youngest Elias stopped. "I can't hear my own heartbeat." The oldest Elias replied quietly. "Because this place existed before echoes." They continued downward. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Then the staircase ended. A vast circular chamber lay before them. Unlike the library. Or the lake. This room contained almost nothing. No shelves. No carvings. No furniture. Only a single pedestal stood in the center. Upon it rested an ordinary blank book. Its cover was pure white. No title. No lock. No dust. The youngest Elias approached cautiously. "That's it?" The oldest Elias didn't answer. His face had turned pale. He looked as though he had seen a ghost. "What is this place?" asked the older Elias. The oldest finally spoke. "I've spent lifetimes searching for this room. And I hoped it didn't exist." The youngest Elias reached toward the book. Before his fingers touched it, a voice filled the chamber. Not the listener. Not the bells. This voice was calm. Gentle. Almost human. One author only. The youngest Elias froze. The white book slowly opened by itself. Every page inside was completely blank. Then, words began appearing. Not written by an invisible hand. They simply formed. As if the paper already knew them. The first sentence read. "Once there was a man named Elias Rowan who believed history could only be discovered." Another line appeared. He was wrong. The youngest Elias felt his throat tighten. The book was writing about him. In the present. The older Elias stepped forward. "No. It always starts like this." He reached toward the pages. The moment his fingertips touched the paper, his hand passed straight through it. Like smoke. He stared in disbelief. "I can't." The oldest Elias nodded sadly. "You already wrote your ending." The White Book continued. Every version believed the story belonged to the past. None realized they were still inside its first chapter. The youngest Elias whispered, "What is this?" The oldest Elias answered, "The original chronicle. The first history. The one from which every other story is copied." A sudden gust of warm air swept through the chamber. The blank pages began turning rapidly. Each page stopped for only a second. Yet every one contained a different life. A sailor crossing unknown seas. A queen signing a peace treaty. A shepherd watching falling stars. A child planting an oak tree. Thousands of lives. Thousands of beginnings. Then, the pages stopped turning. One final page remained blank. At the top, only 6 words slowly appeared. The ending has not been chosen. Silence. The oldest Elias laughed softly. Not from amusement. From relief. I was right. There has never been a blank ending before. Suddenly, the bronze key bearing Thomas's name floated from the youngest Elias's hand. It hovered over the empty page. A tiny keyhole appeared in the center of the paper. The key slid inside. It turned once. A bright golden light burst from the book. The chamber vanished. The staircase disappeared. The lake. The library. The church. Everything dissolved. The 3 Eliases found themselves standing in the middle of Ashmere. Except, the village was unfinished. Half-built cottages faded into empty air. Roads ended abruptly. Trees existed only as pale outlines. The church had no bell. The bridge crossed nothing at all. It was as if they were witnessing the village before reality had decided what it should become. Children made of light ran silently through the streets. Buildings appeared and disappeared with every blink. The youngest Elias whispered, "This isn't Ashmere." The oldest Elias looked around slowly. "No. It is." Before anyone remembered it. Then, across the empty village square, a familiar small figure appeared. Thomas. Alive. Smiling. He raised one hand and called out. "You finally made it to the beginning." Before any of the Eliases could reach him, a shadow fell across the unfinished sky. Not a cloud. A silhouette. Enormous. The shape of a bell. It covered the entire valley. Thomas's smile faded. He looked upward and whispered. "He found us before the ending was written." Every journey through history eventually reaches its final page. Not every mystery is meant to be solved. Some exist to remind us that the past is more fragile than we imagine. Tonight, the last page of Ashmere is waiting to be written. Let's finish the story. The enormous shadow of the bell stretched across the unfinished sky. The half-formed village grew silent. The glowing children vanished. The pale outlines of houses flickered like candle flames in the wind. Only Thomas remained. He looked much older than before. Not in appearance, but in his eyes. "I tried to bring you here sooner," he said. "The listener always found me first." The youngest Elias stepped toward him. "Who are you, really?" Thomas smiled. "I was the first child born in Ashmere." He paused. "And the last." The oldest Elias lowered his head. "I should have told you." Thomas shook his head. "If you had, he wouldn't have believed you." The younger Elias frowned. "Believed what?" Thomas looked across the unfinished village. "This place isn't a prison. It isn't cursed. It was built to protect something. The ending." He pointed toward the white book that now floated above the village square. Its pages turned slowly in the wind. Only the final page remained blank. "Every story ever told," Thomas whispered. must have an ending. But sometimes, an ending is too dangerous to write. The shadow in the sky deepened. The sound of distant bronze rolled across the valley. Not loud. Not threatening. Patient. The listener had arrived. The unfinished sky slowly opened. The immense eye appeared once more. Only now. It was larger than the valley itself. It gazed at the floating book. Not at Elias. Not at Thomas. The book. The voice echoed gently. Complete the chronicle. The oldest Elias laughed quietly. For centuries. I thought it wanted memories. It wanted an ending. The listener answered. Every story requires one. The oldest Elias looked toward the youngest Elias. No. It requires a choice. The floating book drifted down, stopping directly before the youngest Elias. A fountain pen appeared beside it. Old. Simple. Made of dark oak. The page remained blank. Waiting. The voice spoke one final time. Write. The younger Elias looked at the pen. Then at the two older versions of himself. If I write, what happens? The oldest Elias smiled. We disappear. The older Elias nodded. So does every version of us. Thomas added quietly. And Ashmere. Silence. The wind stopped. Even the bells waited. The youngest Elias thought of the journals. The library. Margaret tending flowers beside the bridge. Malcolm refusing to cross the forest. The priest sweeping the church floor. Thomas laughing despite remembering every timeline. They had lived. They had hoped. They deserved more than another cycle. He picked up the pen. The page welcomed the ink. He did not write a date. He did not write his own name. Instead, he wrote only one sentence. History does not belong inside perfect memory. It belongs in the hearts of those willing to remember, forgive, and let go. The moment the final period touched the page, the white book closed. Not violently. Softly. Like someone finishing a bedtime story. Everything became quiet. The great eye blinked once. Then, for the first time, it looked away. The shadow of the bell dissolved into morning light. The unfinished cottages became real. Trees filled with leaves. Flowers bloomed along every road. The church tower stood complete. But there was no bell inside it. Only empty wooden beams where one had once hung. The oldest Elias smiled. I never imagined silence could sound so beautiful. His body slowly became transparent. So this is what an ending feels like. He looked at the younger Elias. Live the life none of us could. Then he faded into countless tiny sparks of light. The older Elias followed. Before disappearing, he laughed softly. I finally remember enough to forget. He, too, vanished. Thomas remained. He looked around the peaceful village. It's over. The youngest Elias smiled. Yes. Thomas shook his head. No. It's beginning. He handed Elias the small wooden whistle one last time. You won't need this anymore. What about you? Thomas looked toward the sunrise. I've been waiting a very long time to become a normal boy. He ran toward the village road. With every step, he became younger. His memories faded from his face. His burden disappeared. By the time he reached the bridge, he was simply a laughing child chasing butterflies across the grass. Then he disappeared into the morning mist. Elias stood alone in Ashmere. The village felt different. Real. Ordinary. For the first time, People argued in the marketplace. A dog barked loudly. Someone accidentally dropped a basket of apples. Children laughed. A blacksmith cursed after striking his thumb with a hammer. The perfection was gone. Life had returned. Margaret approached him slowly. She looked confused. "Good morning. Have we met?" Elias smiled warmly. "I don't believe so." She returned the smile. "I hope you enjoy your stay in Ashmere." Then she continued watering the flowers beside the bridge. Without remembering why she loved them so much. The priest greeted him politely. Malcolm arrived later that afternoon with his wagon. Neither recognized him. Neither remembered the impossible years that had never happened. Only Elias carried those memories now. Not as a burden. As a gift. 3 days later, he left Ashmere. When he looked back from the forest, the village was still there. No mist. No illusion. No vanished valley. Just a small Scottish village beginning an ordinary future. Months later, Elias returned to London. He published no book about Ashmere. He delivered no lecture. He showed no one the map. Instead, he wrote stories. Stories about forgotten people. Quiet villages. Ordinary courage. Second chances. Readers often asked where his ideas came from. He always answered with the same smile. History whispers to those who listen carefully. No one ever knew what he truly meant. Years passed. One autumn evening, an old Elias Rowan sat beside a fireplace, finishing the final page of a manuscript. He smiled, dipped his pen into fresh ink, and wrote the last line. Every ending becomes someone's beginning. He closed the book. Outside, a church bell rang. Once. He listened. Then smiled. "No," he whispered. "That one's only telling the time." He blew out the candle. And for the first time in many years, slept peacefully. Epilogue. In the Scottish Highlands, there are still travelers who claim to have found a quiet village called Ashmere. They describe kind people. Fresh bread. A small stone bridge. And an old church without a bell. When historians search for the village later, they always find it. There is nothing mysterious about the records. Nothing unusual on the maps. Ashmere became an ordinary place. Exactly as Elias had hoped. But if you ever visit on a cool autumn evening, and you notice a little boy crossing the bridge while softly whistling an unfamiliar tune, don't be surprised if he smiles at you. He won't know your name. He won't remember forgotten timelines. He'll simply wave. Like any happy child. And perhaps, that is the happiest ending history could ever ask for. The end.